And we have some announcements.
Just a few. What's the first one?
Turn on
Turn
your
on
phone.
your cell phone.
And it was this summer, and it was about the time I'm going, what am I gonna do? Who am I gonna get to talk about foraging? And I'm asking everybody, nobody knows. And I stopped by their booth and they had all these mushrooms, and I'm like, I grabbed him and said, did you forage these? And he said, no, but I do forage. And then that started the conversation, and I'm not above dragging people off out of the booth to talk to me about stuff like this, which he kindly did. And so he has a wonderful story to tell, so please welcome Diego.
Thank you, everyone. Like I was saying earlier, I'm originally from New York City. Chef, I've been trained in just about every cuisine that there is to know about. I've been doing this probably, I just turned 50, so probably 32, 33 years, so good chunk of my life. Now, foraging is one of those things that you learn early on if you're actually working at a restaurant that is at a certain level. People will show up at the back door with a box of stuff. Hey, look what I gathered in the forest or wherever. We actually had people who would come to us finding things, trying to sell us things that they would find in Central Park. Thanks, buddy, but no. You know, maybe try a little further outside the city. But I was honestly exposed to it at a very young age where, just hanging out in the neighborhood, hanging out in the local parks, things of that nature, you see all these things that are growing. And because of the wonderful city that I grew up in, you have a lot of ethnic cultures who are used to foraging. So I would find, little groups of Asian moms, basically, and you'd find them in the park and they would be picking wild ramps, which are kind of like a leek. They would actually sow different seeds into the ground, so they would come back for them later on in the season. And then, it's a public park, so of course if you put things in the ground and they come up, it's totally legal to pull them out of the ground and serve them and eat them. We always found it very. I always found it amusing that you'd find all these little bunches of people wandering around the park. But a few years later, I find myself with a bunch of my friends wandering around the park. And lo and behold, we find this enormous raspberry bush. And for the next 15 minutes, all you saw was 6 little boys with their butts sticking out of a big bush, just trying to get as many raspberries as we could. So for us, foraging was always like a fun thing to do. It was always kind of one of those time wasters. We're kids. We're just looking for something to do. So, when I was a kid, I really didn't think much of it. It was just a kind of fun activity, and we'd go out and really waste the whole day doing it. So, fast forward to these days where we have a lot of farm-to-table type businesses, a lot of restaurants and people who, like me, will grow products to take to a farmer's market or sell to a restaurant and have them buy it and make a living on that. This book right here, Mountain Stays Foraging, is really fun if you guys want to get it. A buddy of mine bought it for me. I think he got it at Costco or something like that, but I'm sure you can find it just about anywhere. And this one's great because it has a lot of stuff that you don't know, and then it also has a lot of stuff you do know. So things like quinoa and blackberries and gooseberries and one of my favorites, choke cherries. So yeah, choke
We had
cherries
those
are,
last week.
yeah, choke cherries are amazing. So then we as humans, I guess, we've cultivated a lot of techniques to be able to figure out how to forage for things. So the first heading I'm going to talk about today is going to be who actually goes out and forages. In Europe, there are families who they have a tradition of going out in the early season and finding things like ramps and leeks and spring garlic and mushrooms and seps and all types of stuff that they know that are out there. And you pass this along to your children. I've met more than, you know, a dozen young kids in their 20s, not even 30 yet, who they remember going with their great-grandparents, going with their grandparents, and kind of not catching up to it as they should with their parents, because they are here in America now and things are fed to us. We don't have to go out and feed ourselves as we did anymore. So, you know, the thought of all these older folks going out and foraging and then us losing these techniques started becoming important to me as a chef. So now, in these times, you have a lot of folks who they will get together. You know, you've got your meetup groups. I know that the Botanic Gardens has a club that you can join, and that's all they do. They hang out, they talk about mushrooms, they take you out, they show you what's edible, what's not edible, why it is and why it's not. And then from there you actually start to learn what you like, what's available, what time of year, and then you go and you try to find what you can. So with the then crowd, they are so used to being able to go out and forage and find things like that, that when they find something here in the US, they generally don't tell you. So, you know, there are these secret little groups and these secret little pockets of places where if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going with that cool guy, he's not going to tell you and you're never going to find it. So with that in mind, you know, going out and hiking and just trying to find an area that you've never been to before, going out and just being out in nature, especially here in Colorado, you'll find a lot of really edible food. Colorado is probably one of the more I'd say agreeable ones to a large variety of things, whereas on the East Coast where it's very wet, you know, they have rain sometimes, they have snow sometimes. There are certain items that won't grow on certain years, like ramps or, you know, wild leeks. They just don't get enough moisture, they won't come up. And there are restaurants who sometimes they're relying on these people to find these things, and it just doesn't happen. So these days, with the culture the way it is and how many chefs are out there trying to find all the new stuff, and even going to the point of leaving the US to find all these different wild edible foods, you know, some of them gotten stuck in those countries. Like there's a guy that I met one time. He's an awesome, humongous chef now, but he started out with a concept of trying to make a dessert restaurant with all this weird food. And even he says it's weird stuff to use in desserts, but I wanted to try. So what he did was he ended up finding out that there are particular flavors, particular flavor profile that's almost needed for a dessert type of place. So he said it was vanilla, cinnamon, and there was one more.
Sugar.
Sugar or brown. Actually, it's more like brown sugar. Where he was. Well, he was here in the States, but then he went to the Philippines, and then learned that those three items are grown the best, and actually the ones that are foraged are even better than what he could ever have hoped to imagine if it was cultivated. So he spent the next few years trying to figure out how to use all these products, and actually got stuck in the Philippines, and now he owns a very successful dessert restaurant in the Philippines. It's amazing. I mean, he gets fresh milk from a couple different dairies. He gets just about everything is either foraged or handmade or drawn by one other person. So he really did take a lot of the process of getting it from the source to him almost in one fell swoop. And he's got one of the top restaurants in the world, bar none, as far as desserts go. So next topic is gonna be what? So what is edible? Now, that one, that is where to me, that's where a lot of the issues come in. Because you have safety, you have availability, you also have taste. Some things don't taste good at certain times of the year. And then you also have the process of getting it from the source to, you know, the end game or the restaurant or wherever it is you want to serve it, farmer's market, or what have you. Now, back in the day, I guess the one way that we figured out if something was edible or not is to survey the land. Are there any dead animals around this particular item? If there are, maybe we shouldn't try it just yet. If it is something that seems to be edible, if you see deer eating them, if you see rabbits and, you know, just about every animal able to eat one of these, you know, things that just pop up out of the ground, then the next phase is who's going to be brave enough to try it. And that's where the complications come in, because even though it might be good for a deer, may not exactly be good for us. So I'm sure there was quite a few times where somebody was like, oh yeah, I'll try it, dead. And they're like, well, now what? We don't have another taster guy. And it's like, where do we go from here? So, you know, I'm sure that over time, you know, they developed a rudimentary way of being able to tell if things were edible or not edible. These days, it's a lot easier. You're actually able to, like I said, join a club. People will take you out, tell you what's right, what's wrong. You can buy a book. You can even get an app to put on your phone. It'll tell you what's edible or not, what type of season it comes in, what parts of the world they grow best. So then you really do understand, you start to learn about what works best for your cuisine or for what you're really trying to go for.
So does that app tell you what the plant is and?
It usually does, yeah. There's a lot of these apps now where it'll tell you, like one of the mushroom apps that I know of, it will tell you if the mushroom is edible. It'll also tell you if it has a cousin that looks the same that's not edible. So then you won't have that problem of, you know, oh, well, it kind of looked the same, so I kind of tried it, and now I'm in the hospital. And, you know, the reality of, okay, I'm sure a lot of you guys read that article about the death caps found in Aurora. Oh my God, you know how long death caps have been in Colorado? Always, ever. You know, it's one of the things we have in the forest. Just because someone found it in their yard, good for them. They went out to the forest, they probably picked up a spore, dropped it on their lawn, all of a sudden it grows here. I mean, I have found portobellas growing in our parks here in Colorado. You don't want to eat them, but you can find them, you know? So you know that kind of stuff is growing out there and it's available, it's easy to find.
Why don't you want to eat them?
Well, just because we spray a lot of the lawns here in Colorado,
That's it.
so really it's the only reason. I mean, if you have your own wood pile, or if you have a compost pile, and you see a portobello come up, pick it and eat it. 99% of the time, you're going to know 100% of what's in there. So then it becomes okay to eat. You know that, oh, well, we must have thrown a piece of mushroom in there before, and now it started to spore, and now we actually have a flush of these wonderful little mushrooms here. Maybe we should just keep watering them until we actually flush it all out, and then it'll come back. If you do it right, it should be able to come back every year. So,
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, when you're foraging, so say you find these mushrooms, how do you know what to take and what to leave so the plant continues to grow?
I would say, just about every mushroom, as long as you leave the base in the ground, the next generation will be able to come up from that. And also, when you do go foraging, don't take a plastic bag. Take one of those cool little mesh bags. The larger the mesh, the better. So then as you walk, spores will fall out of the bag. And that's how it used to be done, because we didn't have plastic up until very long ago. So people would go out with wicker baskets, or they would take, just even crocheted bags that they would crochet out of jute, and you would just walk through the forest. And as you walk, and foraging is usually this high off the ground. And you have to be this low to be able to see in this direction, because a lot of times when you're looking from up high, as tall monsters to the ground, you'll tend to just glean over it. I know a lot of guys that when they go foraging and they're looking for morels or something like this, they will literally just sit where they think there's, I thought I smelled them. They will sit on the ground and they will just sit and just start scanning the area. You just need to survey where you're at, and then if you happen to see something, then you can go to it. Once you find that first one, it's like a beacon. All of a sudden, oh, there's the next one. Oh, there's the next one. There's the next one. Next thing you know, you have like 5 pounds worth of stuff, and it's fantastic. So
would you cut it off with a knife?
generally with a knife, I like to take scissors with me. So scissors are easier, and I like really long scissors so you can get into some place and just clip it, and then kind of you can also pull it and pull it out, grab it and pull it out. And then the adverse effect is there are particular mushrooms like tree oysters that grow high up in trees. So once again, it's easier to have a pair of scissors and cut it instead of trying to, I'm not going to climb a tree up here, so I'm done with climbing trees. So the prep on a lot of this type of food is always going to be very simple. The forest itself is going to give you so much flavor in that item that you found, and it's going to impart that flavor to whatever dish you're making. So from there, you always want to just be cognizant of what meal you're going to prepare. Like there are a lot of folks, when I sell them morels, their first thing is, I'm going to take these home, I'm going to bread them and fry them. That always seems to be the number one thing. And I don't know where that came from, because when I was in New York City learning different techniques, that was not one of the ones we made. That was not something we made. And it's very strange to me now, because it seems like that's pretty much the number one, thing to do is take them, you dip them, you batter them, you fry them. Weird, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Fast food nation.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. And then then say like chanterelles, the other, I guess, big recipe I always find with chanterelles, people love to cook them with eggs. Eggs in the morning seems to be a thing. Chop up a little shallot, get that going, throw your chanterelles in there, get that sauteed, just throw a couple eggs in there, and just make an omelet, go to town. Fantastic. So, the different parts of the world that we find the most of what we can forage are going to be areas like Colorado, like Europe, in the mountains. There is quite a bit of foraging that goes down in the I guess you could say on the sea, because there are some products that we buy actually for the farmers market. They're called sea beans, and it actually looks like tiny little asparagus, but they are so salty. It feels like you just took just a scoop of seawater and tried to drink it. It is that salty in that much of a piece of live green plant. So you never know what you're going to find, and you never know where you're going to find it, but there's almost nowhere that you can't go and find forageable food. You just need to be able to get to whatever area you are and really understand what you're dealing with as far as your, the flora and the fauna, the temperature and the humidity. So like things for us in Colorado, we do not grow morels very well, but we can grow tree oysters this big. We can grow chanterelles this big. We cannot grow things like red reishi mushrooms, which are supposed to be the #1 cancer fighter right now. So your area really delineates what you can forage and what time of year you can forage it. And that goes for everything from the greens to, I mean, you can find wild rosemary still growing all over Colorado. You can find wild asparagus growing all over Colorado. At one time, Arvada was the #1 producer of asparagus in the country. Blows my mind. It just blows my mind. So yeah, I mean, if you travel around the railroad lines in Arvada, you'll find wild Italian plums. You'll find wild peaches. You'll find wild nectarines. And down here in Littleton, I know that in the past, out in what's the park right over here? Thank you, Roxborough Park. When I used to ride my mountain bike all up and down it, we'd find all kinds of nuts and acorns and things like that from all the different trees that we have here. So you really need to know what you like to eat, and then if it's one of those things you want to do, see if you can go out and forage for it. See if you can find these kinds of things out. Even if you just find an acorn that you can't eat, you'll be like, oh well, maybe at one time I could have eaten this. If I could find 100 of these, I could make something out of it. So, let's see. Okay. Other parts of the world that I do like to talk about when I talk about foraging are places like Spain. Tons of foraging going on there, and for them, it's things that we don't even have here. Things like there's wild olive trees, and there are wild persimmon trees that just grow all over the country. There are people that are walking to work just like grabbing something on the way to work. It's incredible. It's incredible. And of course, places like France and Italy where those are traditions in their culture. Places like Yugoslavia and Russia. I have a couple. They are from Romania, and they are much older, and they have got to be one of my favorite people that come to the market, because they will come, they will inspect, they will smell, they will love my mushrooms, and never buy a one and then tell me I'm a jerk. But the funny thing is, they will buy everything else, and then they will tell me, oh yeah, we're gonna go forage tomorrow and go find some steps. And, really? You're just stab me in the chest, why don't you, So they truly are like one of my favorite customers, because they do. They come back and they show me the things that they do forage. Like they'll come back with a backpack and be like, we found all these bolitas just, right up there, just right in the mountains. And they do it every single year, and they are amazing, amazing foragers. And it's one of those kind of things where I wish I had the availability and the time to be able to just like, hey, take me with you, and go and learn from them, because that's really the best way to learn. It's from somebody who, to them it's not a hobby. To them it's just one of those things they do, something they learned as a child and they continue to do. It's part of what makes them them. So then, when is the best time to pick different things? So, just like in regular land where we have our seasonal and our perennial flowers and herbs and food that we can grow, it's the same thing for forageable items. There are particular times of the year where things will grow well, and then you'll see that time period like go away in as far as the calendar goes. When you start foraging, you start picking things, and you say, oh well, these were good here in May, they're gone by July. And then you start finding other things where you start putting them on your foraging calendar, basically. Once you start getting into this, it almost gets addictive, because you get kind of crazy. It's like, we're gonna go try find this, and if you don't, for some people it's upsetting. You wanted to go out and find something, and you're not gonna stop, but it is great when you do find something, and it's great when you find something every single time. And then sometimes you just find something else. You're like, whoa, we weren't even looking for those, but they seem to be growing here in this particular area. Put that down in my little phone where I got my little directions, and it'll tell you where you should be going in your area. So like here in Colorado, things that are seasonal are like, you know, your blackberries, your currants that grow here, chokecherries, your asparagus, and then of course we have our perennials, which are, everybody has mint in their yard, right? That is one of the hardiest perennials here in Colorado.
Grow in concrete.
Oh yeah, super tough to get rid of. And then there are other perennials that do really well that a lot of people don't really think about. So things like horseradish grow super great here in Colorado. Things like sunchokes. I actually have a large sunchoke patch and a large horseradish patch. I dig them up at around this time of year, and I actually sell them to a friend of mine who he actually distributes to all the best restaurants in town. So for me, as a gardener, forager, dude who likes to just play in the dirt, those kind of things are great because you get to see the beauty of what they are, and then when you cut them down, you get to eat what's really left over. And to me, it's always fun. It's almost as fun as go away. It's just as much fun, or almost more fun, than growing tomatoes and things like that, because tomatoes here in Colorado are one of the toughest things to grow. Anyone who's tried it knows there's a point where you just want to kill the plant anyway, you know, it's like, come on, man, you know, and you're waiting for them to turn red, and you're waiting for them to turn red, and you're waiting for them to turn red. Whereas these other items that are more, I would say, winter ready and winter survival mode style stuff, you know, pumpkins and gourds of all kinds, we do really well here in Colorado with that. And things like sunchokes and mint and that stuff. So you really have to remember, yes?
What are sunchokes?
Sunchokes are part of the sunflower family, but instead of eating the seeds from the sunflower, you actually eat the roots. So it's like horseradish in that manner, and it's kind of like a potato. It's a nice and starchy. A lot of restaurants that I know, they will take them, prepare them, so they'll boil them up, add a lot of seasoning to them, and then make them into a puree or a whipped. They'll also put it with mashed potatoes, make a whipped mash. It's kind of a thing.
You can
So-
do that same thing with celery root.
Correct, yep.
And that is just spectacular. It's my new favorite.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's also celeriac that grows well. So a lot of root vegetables do grow fantastic here in Colorado, which is why I like using the tower gardens, because with the tower garden, which we'll talk about in a minute, I actually grow a lot of my stuff, like all my tomatoes and herbs and things in the tower garden, and then I can have more root vegetable. So I can have one more type of potato if I wanted to grow it that year. I can put more, celery root or celeriac in the ground, and it just doubles the amount of room that you can actually grow, and then literally forage it. And then, why do we forage? Is it really practical? These days, I wouldn't say that it's practical. It's honestly practically crazy to go out and do it, but it's fun. I mean, if you really like getting out into the open and spending time with the family, or maybe not spending time with the family, whatever you need, going out and foraging is a fun thing. It's like going on a hike, but with even more purpose, because you're trying to come back with something usable. It's like the dog when he finds his favorite stick. You're not getting the stick. He's going to keep the stick. He may drop the stick 1,000,000 times, but he's going to go back for the stick, take the stick. So for foragers, it's the same way, and I was actually having a conversation with my mother. I was talking to her about doing this, and she said, something else that you're forgetting as far as foraging is, there's a lot of urban foraging that goes on now, where people are searching for things like soup kitchens and, free food this and, give away that. A lot of these coupon companies that give things away, that's also foraging. To me, that's going out there and trying to find that little thing that's gonna help you to survive that next day. To me, that's what foraging is all about, how to survive for the next day. Which honestly, in this day and age, we don't need that. I mean, I don't need to go and try and forage things from the forest. As far as the farmer's market goes, I literally make a phone call and I get my mushrooms, so I don't even have to forage for those things these days. But the folks who are going out to find food, people who are going to farmers markets, I also consider that foraging, because it's not, you're not just gonna be driving down the road like, oh, King Supers, turn here, I'm gonna get food. Generally it's, well, I'm looking for an awesome piece of steak, or I'm looking for a bunch of mushrooms that Whole Foods doesn't have, or they're charging, half the mortgage, just so I can have a cool dinner. Let me go to the farmer's market and see what I can find. And then from there, that's where your foraging adventure begins. It's like, and when you come across somebody like me, I'm gonna help you to get to that next level where, you find it more as an entertaining thing to do with your family, and not just trying to survive to the next day. So, and then the safety issues that surround foraging themselves, to me, I think are more important than talking about everything else, because there are people who trip, fall, hurt themselves, break a leg, and then it's not fun after that. It really is not. So, the safety aspect to me in foraging is just as important as like trying to go out and find a particular item. So, and then, all right. So some of the famous guys that we know are huge foragers. I'm sure everyone's heard of Jamie Oliver. He's a prominent chef. He's like, I mean, love this guy. Cannot tell you how much I really enjoy watching him as a cook. He is really knowledgeable. Love all the food that he does create, and he's going in a really great path. Then there's people like Martin Picard. He's a chef in Canada that I know, and if any of you own Netflix, there's a new show that just came out where this guy, he goes out and he literally kills the animal, and then he will go and show you how he does it, and then he will take it home and eat it. That is also foraging. That is the ultimate of the foraging, the hunter-gatherer aspect of what we do. And Martin has been at the forefront of that, where he's not exactly like the hunter-gatherer style, but in Canada there are a lot of products that we don't get to see here. So there's a yeah, Canadians.
I'm Canadian.
Yeah, Canadians. Yeah, Canada's awesome. So